Good evening and welcome to this special meeting of the Council of the Municipality of North Perth. Our meeting date is Monday, May 13th, 2024. I'm Mayor Todd Kasenberg and I'll call this meeting to order. I ask the clerk to note our starting time for the minutes at 7 p.m. A warm welcome is extended to councillor, staff, delegations, and observers who will participate in this meeting regardless of whether being physically in the council chamber in Listowel or being connected through web technologies. We begin tonight's meeting with the playing of O Canada. Those in chambers as able are invited to stand. We acknowledge that we are on the traditional land of the Anishinaabe peoples. We wish to recognize the long history of Indigenous peoples in Canada and show our respect to them today. We recognize their stewardship of the land. May we all live with respect on this land and live in peace and friendship. Tonight's meeting is being streamed live on the Municipality of North Perth YouTube channel and will be available there after this meeting as an archived video. To those viewing this meeting via the YouTube channel, a warm welcome to you. To those present in the gallery today by attending a public meeting of the Council, you are consenting to your image, voice, and comments being recorded. Anyone who is invited to speak will be recorded, and their voice, image, and comments will form part of the live stream. The chair and or the clerk have the discretion and authority at any time to direct the termination or interruption of live streaming. Such direction will only be given in exceptional circumstances when deemed relevant. Circumstances may include instances where the content of debate is considered misleading, defamatory, or potentially inappropriate to be published. Attendees are advised that they may be subject to legal action if their actions result in inappropriate and or unacceptable behavior and or comments. Thank you. At this time, I invite your decorum over the course of the coming meeting. I have regrets tonight from Councillor Neil Anstead. Let us move to item 4 on our agenda pertaining to pecuniary interest. For the benefit of those unfamiliar with our council practices, provincial legislation requires councillors with a potential pecuniary or financial interest in any item at the council table to declare this interest and to remove her or himself from discussions and voting on the item. In accordance with recommended protocol at this time, I invite all councillors with a perceived pecuniary interest, including those who have declared in writing, to verbally advise the chair in public session and to submit documentation to this effect in writing to the clerk. Councillors are further reminded that should a potential conflict arise during the meeting, they may so declare and act at any point in the meeting. I don't believe we've heard any in advance of the meeting. Colleagues, any of you wishing to make a declaration at this time? All right, I'm not seeing any indication of that. My role as chair, of course, prompts me to manage the flow of proceedings tonight and largely in accord with our agenda. We usually do have some participating by web conference should they wish to speak They may draw the attention of the clerk to this using the conferencing technology's text chat function. And certainly if technical difficulties arise for any remote participants, I will advise and attempt to send help. Let us now focus on the people's business. Part of that focus is achieved when those in the chamber silence and put away their phones. Regarding item 5 on our agenda, I have a resolution for consideration to approve the agenda as follows, that the agenda for tonight's meeting be approved. Can I call for a mover on this one? Councillor Nordham, thank you. Seconded by Councillor Richardson. Any discussion or debate? Seeing none, let's have that vote. And Councillor Andreessen records a manual in favor vote. I believe we have 9 votes accounted for, and that is carried. Thank you. Let's turn next then to the entertainment of any delegations. We do not have any this evening. So, for the purposes of executing a public meeting under the Building Code Act, I use my discretion as head of council to announce a recess that will last the duration of the public meeting. In said public meeting, council will consider a report from RSM Building Consultants that brings forward a methodology, results, and recommendations relating to the establishment of a revised chart of building permit fees and charges. We are temporarily in recess. All right, that brings us to our public meeting. That's what is the primary focus of our special meeting tonight. I'm going to call this meeting to order. This council is duly authorized to hold this public meeting for the purpose of considering revisions to fees and charges related to building permit fees under the Building Code Act 1992. Our agenda tonight for this public meeting appears as follows. First, we will hear from our chief building official, Sally McMullen, to help us orient to the issues of updating the fees and charges associated with the provision of services, including permits, by the building department of the municipality of North Perth. She may call any other expert she desires to support a presentation to this council. Following Ms. McMullen's remarks, we will consider public comments and inputs. Those who've attended, we will advise you that we would like you, I think, to sign an attendance sheet or record. I'm trusting the clerk is in possession of that and will ask that. We also ask, if you wish to speak, that you identify yourself and your address, that we have that for the record. Following receipt of public comments and inputs, there will be the opportunity for council to have a discussion and to establish its will in addressing the recommendations that are coming from the building department and about these new fees and charges. And then we will proceed to adjourn the public meeting and resume in regular council for the purpose of giving staff direction about next steps and to consider one other additional urgent matter that has been put on our agenda tonight. All right, so here we are. Let's have Ms. McMullen. It looks like Ms. Pape is going to come up first. All right. So Ms. Pape is going to be with us. Welcome to the podium and take it away.
Good evening, Mayor Kasenberg, members of council, and member of the public. For those of you who don't know, my name is Janny Pape. I'm the Manager of Development and Protective Services. Tonight I'm joined by Devin Staley, Manager of CBO Services at RSM Building Consultants, Ashton Romani, our Treasurer, and Sally McMullen, our CBO. Tonight's presentation includes information about the requirements of fees and any proposed changes to them under the Building Code Act, the methods used to evaluate and determine the proposed fees, and considerations regarding the reserve fund. The municipality has the duty of enforcement of the Ontario Building Code, and with that duty, the authority to set fees for cost recovery. Any changes in fees need to demonstrate what the costs are and that the fees are not being set to exceed those costs. The costs have been reviewed and were approved by council during the 2024 budget process and represent expenses that are not considered to be in excess. The department is accountable to this process through the annual fees report, making costs and revenues available to the public. As you may recall, this was last reported in March. As a deficit, carried by the reserve fund due to fees being set below operating costs and contracted services. This fees review does not include costs for contracted services on a general basis. The costs included here are what it looks like for the building department to be self-sufficient, except for specialized or complex buildings like hospitals, long-term care facilities, large and tall buildings, motels, and apartment buildings. While North Perth's building permit fees have been reviewed in the past, there has not been a fee increase since 2008. I'll now turn the presentation over to my colleague, CBO Sally McMullen. Sorry, Devin. Devin's going to join us next.
Good evening. Next one. Yeah. So to do the building permit fee study, the objective was establish anticipated reasonable costs related to the administration enforcement of the Building Code Act, set the amounts for various building permit fees to cover those based on the rationale of full cost recovery, and increase the reserve fund balance to 1 year's worth of expenses saved. The review process was to analyze the building permit activity data from 2020 to 2023 to determine the average level of building permit activity. Next, we determined the total recoverable costs representing a full cost recovery for the provision of administration and enforcement for the Building Code and Building Code Act. And last, we reviewed the existing reserve fund balance to determine if an increase was required for future spending by the department. The review process results, the total average permits issued between 2020 and 2023 was reconciled to 393.5 permits per year. The total recoverable costs, which represent a full cost recovery for provision of services, was calculated at $889,905. And the reserve fund balance was approximately $202,845 and is currently being used to offset contracted services. This was as of December 2023. The updated unaudited figure for the reserve fund balance is now $100,000. So the permit fees calculation, how do we get these fees? So we determine the base fee for each permit type and service. We determine which permits would require a cross subsidy. We determine the desired reserve fund balance and amounts to be applied to each permit and service to build the fund back up. And then we propose a new fee amount. So to set the stage for what a base fee is, the base building permit fees are costs that are incurred by the municipality for each permit type and service offered by the building department. We determine these base fees by calculating the staff time that's spent and multiply the wages and then add a portion of all the direct and indirect costs to each permit and service. Currently, base fee costs incurred by the municipality, for an example, for a 2,500 square foot single family home would be a total of $2,646. The current building fee collected for this permit type is $1,775, which is 33% less than the base fee alone to do the work that's required. Overall, the building permit fees would require an increase to cover the municipal costs, which is the minimum base fee. So then after we calculate a base fee, we look into cross-subsidy. So a cross-subsidy of building permit fees is an adjustment for cost recovery which allows the permit fee values to be reduced for certain types of permits. For example, a residential deck or shed. The base cost for administration enforcement on a deck permit is approximately $1,779. If the base value of this permit fee was applied and charged, could be substantially higher than the cost of actually doing the construction alone, and it would likely deter applicants from obtaining building permits for these types of projects, which can cause an enforcement concern. So therefore, the proposed deck fee has been reduced by a cross subsidy to $385. So this type of cross subsidy affects almost 211 permits a year based on the average permit activity types that North Perth has. To ensure full cost recovery for the building department, the lost revenue from reducing these fees needs to be collected somewhere else. So the remaining permit types, such as new residential, new groups, A, assembly, B is care, D would be an office, E, mercantile, or F is industrial or new farm buildings. The new ones would have the cross subsidy amount applied to it. Each permit has had different amounts added or reduced to remain fair and equitable. It's not a consistent percentage that the fees will increase across all permit types. Each permit type is different. So the reserve fund. The reserve fund is a balance from which monies can be withdrawn to offset the costs of building department in low times of permit activity or in staffing shortages. In times of increased building activity, any revenue over the total recoverable costs would be added to the reserve fund. The funds can also be used to provide a source of capital for department needs such as new equipment and vehicles. To increase the balance of the reserve fund, a conservative surcharge of 10% has been added to each fee type that's proposed in these building permit fees. The surcharge would generate an approximate $88,000 per year. It would take about 10 years to reach 1 year of expenses saved, if the balance is not reduced for further expenses. Currently, the building department has staff in place and is also supported by third-party consulting services, which are paid for out of the building permit reserve fund. As the building department continues to reestablish its staffing and become independent of individual support, the need for consulting services will be reduced along with the costs associated with that. It's not known when the additional service will conclude, but they're expecting it to decrease over the next couple of years. So when we add all of these together, to calculate the new fees, we have the following amounts that we add together. The base fee, plus or minus the cross subsidy, plus a 10% reserve fund surcharge, equals our new proposed fees. To ensure the new permit fees will generate enough revenue to cover the total recoverable costs, we do a test. The building permit fees that we propose is multiplied by the average permit activity that we've seen over the last 3 or 4 years to ensure that the new fees will generate a full cost recovery. We've provided 2 options to show some overall recoverable amounts. Option A is proposed to adopt the proposed fees in 2024, with the reserve fund growth starting in approximately 2030. Option B has been laid out in the package to show a phased-in collection of the amounts over 2024, 25, and 26, with the reserve fund starting to see growth in about 2036. The reserve fund will be depleted in 2024 and continue to see a negative balance over the next couple of years. As the new fees start to support the building department and third-party consulting needs are reduced, it's anticipated that the reserve will start to be in a positive balance by as early as 2030. Our recommendations for council, with a total cost recovery and more timely restoration of the reserve fund, we recommended option A. Option A was a total recovery of the building permit fees in 2024. Also recommend that an annual adjustment of fees be completed to keep pace with the cost of service and inflation, and to complete a review study in 5 years, and not longer, to keep and ensure compliance with the Building Code Act. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. So from a finance treasury perspective, the building department, as mentioned earlier, is currently self-funded. This means that there are no external funding sources such as taxation to support these activities aside from its own fees. So in order to keep these self-funded, in years that there are operating surpluses, these surpluses will be directed into its own dedicated reserves, and in years that are deficits, it would draw from that same fund. The intent of the building reserves is to support years where there are lower than anticipated revenues, such as reduced building activity, or higher than anticipated expenditures, such as consulting, or a combination thereof. Furthermore, surpluses under the Building Code Enforcement Act are prohibited from being allocated to other funds, such as taxation, which is why you see the self-funding model be a common approach for municipalities. So if council has a desire to maintain this practice of being self-funded, it's important to consider these fees as proposed. Ensuring that these fees are structured to capture the actual costs associated with the building code enforcers would not warrant another source of funding to sustain the building code operations. In the absence of the proposed cost recovery model, it would require funding from other sources of funding, which would generally default to the tax levy. As referenced earlier in the presentation, the building reserve is anticipated to slide into a deficit, with the current projections anticipated to be at the end of this year. In order to ensure that we build us back to that state, healthy state in future years, we would need to consider this rate of proposal. As well as mentioned, the fees have not been reviewed since 2008. It's recommended, as Devin had mentioned earlier, on a go-forward basis that the building permit fees be indexed annually. This ensures that associated revenues keep pace with the inflationary pressures, as mentioned. As well, keeping pace with inflation in most cases results in smaller gaps in instances where a comprehensive might be performed in the future. This recommendation isn't exclusive to the building operation, but recommended on a municipal-wide approach, but that's to be discussed at a later date for other municipal matters. Lastly, I'd like to extend my support that another review be planned in a few years' time to ensure that there's a proper alignment in the fees and cost recovery basis for building code enforcement. So now I'd like to pass it off to CBO McMullen.
Good evening, Council and members of the public and staff. So we've heard the math. This is the fundamentals where we begin the conversation. You've heard a recommendation from a third party around what levels of fees would produce a cost recovery for the budget for the building department in an average year. And this represents some balance moving forward. Now, I think it's prudent that we start in a place where we can look at balance and look at that cost recovery through a self-funded system. But that doesn't mean that we don't need to discuss other parts, and that's where the public meeting is so valuable and important. So it's hard to consider these fees and certainly the increases in them in the context of the need for more housing in our community, and certainly housing that is affordable. So I welcome conversation from the public and from council around what level of relief would be sufficient to be supportive in this housing, this time of difficulty in not only housing, but in a housing affordability. And also welcome discussion around what kind of assurance measures, how do we measure that those savings or those relief measures are actually hitting the folks that are struggling with affordability, whether that's a new build or with rent. So these are important discussions that we need to have, and I think an important place to go after hearing this fundamental cost recovery values that would produce a balanced budget in an average year for the building department. So what I want to leave you with before we hear from the public is a set of summary comments and then also a set of next steps so we know where we're going from here. So we've seen the cost recovery model and what those values are for each permit type, and that's in the appendix of the report from RSM third-party consultant. Those costs are based on actual costs for the that we have seen in the 2024 budget, representing an average year, and don't include any outside consulting in a general way. So we've really tried to look at what does it look like around here from a cost perspective if we are managing the enforcement and the administration of our duties under the building code in-house. And how do we reflect that in a cost recovery system? There is an increase across all categories. And there is a measure, not only in the building code, but in our practice here, to be accountable to the figures on an annual basis, so that there is this review process. And we experienced that together about a month ago, where you were brought the revenues and the expenses for the department on. And that's an important checkpoint annually to help keep us on track. From next steps, from that perspective, hearing from the public, certainly important. And there are some written comments that have been provided to you in your packages, and I think by email just today. And then folks that are in attendance or online. And then to hear from you, the questions that you have, directions that you want to give us for additional information that you may need in order to make a decision about where to go with fees and how to direct staff for amendments to the fees and charges bylaw that will come. And those directions then will go back to staff so that I can come back to you at a future regular council meeting and provide you a recommendation. So you've heard recommendations from the third-party consultant around what it looks like to have a cost recovery and a balanced system. And after tonight, we will go back with your directions to explore things further, any other details that you feel you need, and provide you with a recommendation from staff that's built on that fundamental math, as we've been talking about, and the considerations that may be brought forward here tonight. And then ultimately, at the end of the day, any changes to the fees would be enacted through an amendment to the fees and charges bylaw. So we are certainly here for questions and can also provide clarifications through the comments that you may receive tonight. Thank you.
All right. Thank you to the team that has presented to this public meeting information that is of use to us. We certainly have reports in the package that we received and that are also in the public domain. So let's move forward then with the opportunity for those who are attending and wish to present an opinion or ask questions about this matter. You're welcome to come forward at this time. Gently, I'll suggest that we should use generally the same practices we use for council delegations. So we'll ask you to cap your comments at about 10 minutes if we can do that. And certainly we expect those who are here to present on that topic to focus on the topic, which is about this proposed set of changes to our fees and charges relating to building permits. And certainly if you want to go off topic, I'm not going to be all that pleasant. So just be aware that we want you to be focused on this. We certainly do expect respect and courtesy. That includes, as we've been saying in our delegations, not using the names of people who haven't consented to the use of their name in this setting. All right, so anyone wishing to ask questions is welcome to come forward to the podium. We ask that you identify yourself with your name and your address of record. The clerk will be taking some notes on this, and I don't know if there's an attendance sheet that they have to sign afterwards or not, but we certainly want to track your names and your addresses to ensure that we reflected your participation in our meeting. Here's the opportunity. Please come forward if you wish to speak. Okay, I'm not seeing anyone. I'll give you another opportunity. Maybe this is an auctioned off thing. Maybe I should call on Councillor Johnston. I don't know. Opportunity number 2 to come forward and speak or ask questions about the proposal that is before council with regards to building fees and charges. All right, I don't know if there's a procedure, but I'm going to do opportunity 3. This will be sort of our last call, and then we'll open it to council for discussion. So opportunity 3 is now available to speak. If you have questions or would like to make comments about this matter, we are prepared to have you come forward and hear you at this time. Nobody is taking me up on this wonderful offer. So this turns attention then to, in accordance with your agenda, to council. Opportunity to ask questions and offer first comments on this matter is certainly now available to colleagues around the council table. Anyone wishing to avail themselves of that usual procedure, raise your hands. Anyone? Okay, Councilor Richardson, let's get you started.
Thank you. And through you, Mayor Kasenberg, I find this, I understand the concept of the report that has come back, but I also find it incredibly concerning. And I get it. However, it's been an internal issue that we actually haven't had a full review done in 16 years. And I understand that. But I also find that the proposed option A coming back for the lion's share of our permitting, which is single detached dwellings, row houses, duplex, and whatever, is coming in at 129% increase. With me, that doesn't fly. I think that's just too much, far too quickly, regardless of the backstory of why we needed to be self-funding in the first place. I am not for option A in any way, shape, or form. I understand some increases happen, and even option B for myself that was put forward. Sometimes percentages can skew a conversation, like some of the percentages that were increased in here are a 725% flat fee increase. That sounds like an exorbitant number. The 725 is, but if you look at what the base permit fee was as compared to what a new permit fee, that's just how mathematics works. But even with the proposed B plan phase in for and I'm just going to focus on single detached, that's a 43% increase in the fee. That is still an awful lot, even for a phased in approach. I get it, but I think there's going to be some difficult days ahead as we wrangle through this. I'm for an increase, but not necessarily, certainly not A, and I am not even for really B at this point, but I know we have to do something and have further discussion. And sorry I'm carrying on here, but I also find it quite striking that on one hand we are encouraging and stressing to builders that we need to attainable housing, affordable housing. We keep pounding on that drum that that's what we want to do. And then we come out of the gate with this, not out of the gate. I know it's been there for a while, but we come out with something like this that sort of flies in the face of what we're trying to get the builders to do, which is not good, which will be, rightly so, will be passed on to the end user, which will be the end customer. I just find that's a very bitter pill to swallow in this time. The increase alone for the permit, as was mentioned in a previous discussion prior to council, just that permit increase alone would be a month's rent for somebody, for the best part of. That's incredibly problematic for me. So I know we have to do something, but I just want my 2 cents on record.
Thanks, Councillor Richardson. Who's next? If I might, I'll ask a question. I'm not sure I'm going to formulate this well, but I want to sort of point out the challenge of housing types, residential housing types, obviously, that could be posed by some of the changes. So Councillor Richardson has spoken to the fact that, we're interested in affordability. The question is, do we have the right mix even here? Right, and I'm not sure of that. Should there be some kind of incentive for higher density to bring that price down? Should there be some incentive for those who commit to signing up with CMHC and establishing an affordable contract with them over the long term? And you know, give some incentive there as well. So I'm wondering if I can call on either CBO McMullen or Chief Pate to sort of speak to that topic just generally. I guess I'm asking the question in the context of the cross subsidy that you've already talked about, right? So you've done a little bit of trading with the money in the envelope, if you will, for the sake of being realistic around costs of things like decks and so forth, right? So can we be, or should we be thinking about some cross subsidy around forms of housing that either move towards higher density or that are optimizing for affordability?
Thank you for that question. So, the considerations that we would make in looking at additional cross-subsidy based on certain housing forms that there was an interest in either incentivizing or supporting. And so you would look at the other permit types and you would try to discern which ones you would place that subsidy on. And in doing so, you would have to figure out how many units you anticipate. And in a typical year, the data shows us, like if we're talking about certain forms being ones that you want to incentivize, such as apartment buildings perhaps, or additional residential units, or maybe even semis or towns, those types of higher density units, then it looks like we have a number of them that you would incentivize or desire to incentivize. And then you look at the number of other permit types you want to put that on. So if you wanted to put it on a specific permit type, that's going to be an incredibly large load to bear for, say, other larger housing forms, especially in a non-average year where we would have an apartment building. So if a reasonable incentive is $1,000 less, and I asked that question too, how will we measure what a suitable relief point is? And that's a very interesting question and how we might get there. But if we did that, and it was a certain number of, say, for ease of math, $1,000 per unit, and in a year you get a new apartment building, which happens in Listowel, but it's not a consistent something you can bank on. Then you're reducing $1,000 per unit in a 90-unit apartment building. That's $90,000. So that's the year. That's the year then that you're not collecting $90,000 to put towards your expenses. And maybe the permits, the other side of that coin is when you have an apartment building, for example, that is going to be an influx of revenue. It's not typical, and that's in a positive way influencing revenues. But it's not something that you can count on year after year. So that money in the year that it's received is either likely going to the reserve or to pay for additional help, because something like an apartment building will skew our revenue and potentially skew our expenses. So it gets a little complicated in figuring out, if we're looking at a cross subsidy, what level is enough to come off, which units should it come off, and which units will it be put on. And that's another math exercise that we can do. And I've done some of it just sort of roughly, and it's a tricky math problem, and you have to make a lot of decisions along the way. So I look for direction on what is enough. But secondly, and I think this is the critical piece, is I completely see when a fee is raised that gets passed on. So in an example where you have a builder who's building a number of houses and selling those additional fees for a building permit, for instance, which are generally in the neighborhood of 1% to 2% of a project cost, those get passed on to the purchaser. they will likely get passed on to the renter. Now, in a market economy where rents or purchase prices are determined by the market, how do we ensure and how will we measure that the incentives provided through a relief for a building permit end up affecting rent or purchase price? And so that's another really interesting question. And how do we get there? How do we evaluate that and calculate that and measure that going forward? Perhaps the easier circumstance to contemplate is the one that you mentioned around folks who are engaged in the CMHC program and committing to a fixed rent for a certain number of units or a certain percentage of their building. That one is a little easier to get our heads around how much relief might be enough, and is that relief that's been provided having an effect on true affordability for the folks that need it. And those are the questions that I find very interesting and very hard to solve, and also ones that I think are very much worth discussing.
All right, I think I see Councillor Andreessen's hand up, so you're next, please.
Thank you through you, Mayor Kaysenberg, and thank you for this data and the presentation so far this evening. I just want to share the quandary that I'm facing right now, and that's the fact that, these changes haven't been made since 2008, and here we sit. And it puts this council in a very, very difficult situation where it's no win. We can't win with our developing community and our builders, and we can't win with the decisions that we make either way, because if we don't go with even option A, how are we going to pay for this, right? Because this is not sustainable. It's not sustainable to continue the way that it's been. So I do want to thank our treasurer for ensuring that we continuously review these costs and make sure that we don't have another 16-year gap so that this doesn't happen again. Frankly, it's unacceptable, and it's unacceptable to be facing the decisions that we have to this evening. Let's face it, our developers and those who are paying these fees have had a really good deal for the last 16 years. Let's face it, a really good deal. And now this picture is going to have to look very different. And I'm not sure who's going to have to pay for it. Is it the developers and those engaging in these projects? Or is it going to be through other sources, through the municipality? And as much as I don't want to see these costs go up for anyone, engaging in these projects or the developers themselves, I don't know if it's fair for us as a municipality to swallow it either. I really don't. So it's a very difficult decision for me. One of the things that I do want to look at in more depth is some of the projects that should be changed a little bit, and you mentioned this in your presentation. For instance, the ducts, right, and perhaps massaging those costs because it would be too costly to pay the actual percentage. The other thing I would like to point out is actual tents. Tents are typically put up for special events, and the cost of tents right now is quite high, at about $605 for a building permit for a tent, which is going to really be very expensive for anyone hosting an event. So I'm wondering about some considerations around that. So those are my comments at this point in terms of that one detail. I also share Mayor Kaysenberg's considerations around perhaps looking at what we can do to make it more affordable for those projects that are engaging in affordable projects that are connected to CHMS. Thank you. Um, because we know, as you mentioned, that those projects would definitely have affordability built in, and we know that, and that can be measured. So that would be something I'd like to see. Um, but I think that as a council, we're going to have to make some hard decisions because I don't think that we can be responsible or, continue in this model that's not sustainable. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Councillor Andreessen. Anyone else wishing to weigh in at this point? Deputy Mayor Cullen?
Sure, going through you, Mayor Kasenberg. Thank you, the presenters, for this evening. And I do agree with some comments from my colleagues, especially with Councillor Richardson here. Everything he said, I concur 100%. It is unfortunate that we have not had an increase since 2008, but that's behind us now. We have to move forward, and yes, we do have some hard decisions to make. However, we need to respect our builders and everyone out there. So that being said, I am not in favor of option A or B. I think if we choose either of those, that building permits will come to a halt. There'll be more builds going on without a permit. So I would like to see maybe an option C that we do phase it in over a longer period of time to work with our builders. I'm suggesting 6 or 7 years, and we work with that. Those are my comments. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Deputy Mayor Cullen. Anyone else wishing to weigh in? Councillor Johnston?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do have a question, and I don't know who it's for, whoever feels like answering. Is there a way that we can tier, and I'm not sure that's the right way, as we push for higher density, as we build bigger houses, can we charge them more than 1,000 square foot house pays X, a 2,500 square foot house pays X times 2, and a 3,500 square foot house pays X times 3? Is there a way that we can tier that to help us promote the density that we want, to protect our farmland, to protect our town, and maybe we should be promoting the new building or the new dwelling unit within a unit right now. Maybe we should be promoting that and dropping that fee somewhat to promote the density. But I just didn't know if there's a way to tier fees somehow.
I'm happy to answer that for you. So the way we've looked at the fees is based on the average activity. And so coming up next year and the year after and the year after, we're not guaranteed the size of the houses or square footage of the buildings that are going to be built. So the minimum fee will ensure that as long as we get our average number of permits, that we're creating enough revenue to cover the costs that are incurred. So creating a tiered platform would be a great idea, and I think is something we could look at, but we would need to understand that we may not get the numbers in of the square footages that we're looking at. So we still need to guarantee the revenue. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does answer my question, and I know what you mean. If we're gonna charge you more to build a bigger house, some people may size it down. But if you're gonna build a $2 million house, us charging you an extra $1,000 is pretty minuscule. But if we want to promote housing that is affordable and attainable, then we got to keep that fee where it is affordable and attainable. It's kind of the Robin Hood thing. You take from those that have. Not that anybody building a 3,500 square foot house is likely much better off than someone building a 1,000 square foot house. So, thank you. I think it does answer my question.
Thanks. Councillor Blazek is next.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. Thank you guys for your presentation tonight. Um, this feels incredibly heavy since I got my package on Thursday. I've felt like a weight pushing down, and I can imagine the weight that you guys have felt during this entire process. my colleagues have all made very good points. We are stuck sort of in between a rock and a hard place, but we do need to move. We do need to move forward. Um, the thing is that we can't, like, we have to act now. We will deplete our reserve fund in 2024. So this isn't something that we can push off and wait for, more options and more options. And I do appreciate that we need an option C, but it has to come like now. Either way, I feel like the taxpayer is going to pay for this. Um, they're going to pay through either the purchase price of their home or the cost of their rent, or um, the greater whole of the taxpayers of North Perth are going to pay for this, and that feels really heavy. There's some major sticker shock happening right now. I think that Councillor Johnson had some great ideas with your tiered system. I also don't feel like I can support A or B tonight, even though I feel very much like we need to act now. These don't feel yet like the right options.
Okay. Councillor Duncan?
Thank you, through you, Mayor. I fully understand the financial situation we're in here with this. I can't support A or B at this point either. I think we need a phased-in approach over a bigger period of time. And one of the things I really implore our building department to look at is the use of third-party consulting services in our building department. I think we need to work very hard to eliminate those third-party consulting fees, because that is what's drained our reserve account to this point, and it's what's going to continue to drain the reserve account until we get it built back up. So I think we need to get as much work back in-house as we can, as quick as we can.
Thank you. Councillor Rothwell? Councillor Norton was first, all right.
Thanks to you, Mayor Kiesenberg. Well said by Councillor Duncan. It's going to be unpopular no matter what we do. Raising building rates, it's scary if we have to raise levy for to compensate for building. Either way, it shouldn't be that way. I am kind of curious for comparison with Mapleton and Minto, just our closer neighbors to the north. I'm wondering if we can see that at our next time that we visit this.
Could you specify the kinds of things you want to know about them?
So we have in our agenda package here the building permit comparison on Appendix D for RSM. I'm just curious if we can see maybe Minto and Mapleton.
Okay, you want to see financial numbers? You want to see performance numbers? You want to see...
Just financial would be good.
Okay, thanks. All right, Councillor Rothwell, I think you had your hand up too.
Thanks very much, Mayor Todd, and thanks very much, staff and others for the presentation. As was specifically mentioned, yes, there's sticker shock, certainly around this council table, and I'm sure elsewhere in the community. Council had sort of a heads up about this at the last report that we had in March. And frankly, I think many of us, our heads were spinning as to how fast we got in that situation, seemingly. The building permit is one of the critical steps in our process, and yes, it's all the other administrative processes around it in terms of increasing our assessment within our community. And that increased assessment, which we've experienced because of growth and because of new buildings, whether residential, commercial, industrial, has fueled our economy as well as our ability as a municipality to be able to offset some of the possible tax increases overall. Assessment increases are a direct benefit of new building. And I would like, perhaps, if council agrees, to have staff look at the possibility of having some of that increased assessment help us offset some of the costs which are being proposed in terms of the building permit fee. I know this is different than what is traditionally the perspective in terms of how the building department runs. But somehow it's not just the general tax base that is should be the one that fully benefits from that increase alone on the basis of the work of the building department, which offsets those building permit approvals for all of our benefit. So if council agrees, I would like to see that at an upcoming meeting, and I fully agree with re-looking at what these options are and what that time frame would be to allow for this phase in. There's no doubt, as was mentioned earlier, there has been a great benefit to those within our community that have had building permits over this last number of years, and everyone's happy when we're getting a deal. It's just a matter that, based on the math, we are at a point where we're realizing that overall, everyone is subsidizing everything else on the building permit fees, and that's the reason why we found our situation where we've got depletion of a very healthy reserve fund, which has gone in a heartbeat. So that's my comment. Thank you.
I think I'll offer a brief comment about what you've said, Councillor Rothwell. So certainly we have seen a period of transition in the building department, which has been unprecedented, I think, and yet we know, and I think it was in fact a resolution you had proposed, that there is a substantial problem with availability of chief building officials and people who work in the building inspection services area or vertical. So, North Perth has had, I think, a fairly aggressive approach to trying to find the people that can join our team. And we have largely met with some challenges in the course of that. I think there were 3 different recruitments for a CBO, for example. So there is a substantial challenge, which certainly has been confirmed at AMO and at Roma when the subject comes up on the floor. People chuckle, people cry. I heard one guy who was 72 years old pleading to be able to be retired and who was still serving as CBO in his small community. So there's that challenge inherent that we wound up being stung by, right? I think there's a fair expression of what happened with regards to our need to resort to external solutions to maintain what is a statutory function. Right, we have to do it. We're mandated to do so. I will say that I would like to ask a question, if I might, of the Treasurer, and that is if we were, I don't know if you've done any modeling at all, but perhaps you can give me some sense of whether you've modeled what a tax increase to every taxpayer in North Perth might look like if we were to take this go-slow approach. Because inevitably, somebody got to pay. Right? Somebody always got to pay. And whether it's the person, the applicants as developers, and that includes not-for-profit developers, that includes, a range of sort of business interests, or whether it's the taxpayer of North Perth who pays for a 7-year phase-in, when I think this model was 3-year phase-in or 4? 3, yeah. That deficit is going to accumulate, right? So Treasurer Romani, help me with that. Walk us through what you think would be the impacts of allowing a longer, more stretched out approach to resolving this, and what it would look like for the taxpayer of North Perth if we stuck it on their tax bill.
So through you, Mayor Kasenberg, so at this point, there's no, performed by the consultant, no analysis at this to have the taxation contribute into the building reserve or the building operations. I will say that the projected reserve balance using budgeted figures for 2024, so they're subject to change, as well the audit outcomes for 2023 would be around $500,000 deficit. So the question is, what level of subsidization does the tax base want to input to help rebuild that reserve? Or are we just looking, $100,000 a year when we do that modeling? I guess what's the appropriate horizon? Because around a 1% levy is around $200,000, and I think it's about don't quote me, around $20 on the average homeowner. So to what degree do we want to set the needle to kind of have that reinvestment rate to help offset a potential reduction in the building permit fees?
If I might. So, you've heard some of my colleagues propose a longer phase in, right? I don't know what that looks like because I think that the treasurer and the team will have to model that. But I'm guessing, though, that the deficit continues to accumulate as debt in that account over the longer period. And so you're deeper in the hole at some point 7 years out of here. Does that seem like a fair assumption?
Can you rephrase that? Sorry.
Well, if we go year after year with a much gentler phase in, and I can't define what much is. Sorry, I don't know yet. Right? I think that's for you to model. But I would anticipate that if we take 7 years to get to the target value, that the deficit that accumulates each year is going to get bigger and bigger potentially, and you could have quite an accumulated debt in the account.
That's correct.
Does that sound right to you?
Yep.
Okay, so I think there's some call from our colleagues to model that, to try to figure out what that might look like. Whether it's a 4-year or 3-year phase in, 4 years, 7, 10 years, like you name your number, sooner or later, somebody got to pay, right? And I think we have to figure out whether that's the taxpayer of North Perth who subsidizes this, or whether it's the proponents of development. I think we've heard around this table, and I'm not quite sure that I'm directing a question. I'm making more of a comment, but this could put a chill on development in North Perth. There's a proportion of our community who would appreciate a chill on development. So, when you think about, and to your point, Councillor Rothwell, when you think about the possibility of using the increased assessment as an offset, that increased assessment is already going into the bottom line to reduce the general taxation rate. So, again, somebody got to pay. And if you cleave it out and say, okay, this is just for the building department, then the taxpayers are still going to pay that component for the rest of the operations, right? So I'm not sure that this gets any easier. To Councillor Blazek's comments, I concur. It is a very tough one. We're in an awkward position now. Thanks. Anyone else with comments or questions? And you know what? Maybe now that those who are sitting in the gallery have heard us talk, maybe you have something that you'd like to contribute. I will not object to that if that's the case. Councillor Richardson.
Thank you, and through you again. Would it be possible, I don't expect it right now, to possibly get a better breakdown as an example for a 2,500 square foot single family dwelling where they're saying the municipal base cost is $2,646? Is there a way we can maybe break that out a little bit more to find out where does $2,600 come from for a home and for the time involved? Not looking for drilled right down to the penny, but to provide, there is a slight description as to show it takes staff time, but just an approximation for this one permit, where does that $2,600 figure come from? That all of this math is being generated from.
So to give you exact numbers, we'd have to bring that back to you, but it does involve direct and indirect costs that were part of the approved budget. And then it involves the approximate staff time that would have been spent on the project. So a typical house has so many inspections. Each inspection is so many hours. The plans review time, the zoning review time, each piece gets added up. And then that's where we get the base fee from. So for the single family dwellings, we can return with the breakdown for you. Yeah.
And I think we'll be surprised actually that the typical house has multiple inspections and people driving out there. There are costs in the back office. I think there's a whole lot of stuff that's going on that generates cost per residence, per building type, right? That is very real and it's pretty easy to say, well, we'll kind of absorb this here and this there in terms of indirect costs, but I don't think that's practical in the broad picture to be absorbing all the sort of back office costs anymore, right? So, Councillor Rothwell.
Thank you, Mayor Todd and Council. One of the issues that was brought forward was the possible tiering of fees for building permits, and I would be interested to hear about that. My own view is that there is research already, broad research talking about development charges, dealing with foot frontage, and the larger the lot, the increased amount of development charges to get at the issue of having smaller lots created and therefore increased density. So I'm certainly, staff will be able to provide us with that information. The second point I want to hear from our staff about is when North Perth made the change to the e-permitting, e-building permit process, one of the issues that was talked about was efficiencies as well as decreased administrative costs. Has that helped? Have we done any research as to whether or not, in fact, that has panned out? Or are there additional savings that we can hopefully count on in terms of how the e-permitting process could hopefully decrease some of our admin costs?
The short answer is we haven't measured. Anecdotally, since I've come on board, requiring them to be online hasn't made it much easier to track. It's so much more efficient to know where we're going with a permit and for an applicant to be able to log in and find out the status of their permit and book their inspections. And so on a practical side of things, there's far fewer calls, which means that they're paying more attention to their review. And we've been parceling out like a complete application review versus plans examination versus zoning and fees review. So it helps us to get the right person at the right price point doing the right part. So there are things we could measure, and it has been a work in progress. And so sometimes that makes it hard to have good metrics to bring you right off the hop, but I haven't done that analysis, no.
Thanks very much for that answer. Frankly, as to whether or not it's worth the time and effort to come onto that, I'm more satisfied in hearing what our professional staff have to say about how they believe the process is working, and if it is satisfactory in terms of our building community, in terms of and the relationship, in terms of how building permits are processed traditionally. If there is fewer delays in the process because of lost paperwork, or then traditionally that is helpful, and helpful in my mind equates to more economical and therefore less cost. So I don't think we need to go too much further unless staff think it's possible to do that. But I just think it's important for this council and staff and the public to hear the question in terms of the one major change that's been made in the building department in terms of the e-permitting process. Thank you.
I think you would find there is a mixed bag out there of whether people like it or dislike it. And I think that's fair. Change is hard. And changing to an electronic or an online system is not where some of our builders or homeowners want to be. So recognizing that, the improvements that we have on tracking and being able to show a timeline, to be able to know exactly when something was submitted and to know how much time it took us to review, and when a deficiency list or comments were provided back to an applicant and exactly what those comments were. It's an incredible amount of tracking. I was going to say power, I don't know if that's the right word, but just the efficiencies gained for both parties, I think, is incredible. And I think you would find that public opinion is very mixed on whether they like it or dislike it. But there are a lot of converts out there who did not want to use it and find that they are out on the work site for a long day, and then they want to, when they get back to their office, our office is closed, but they can book their inspections at 7 o'clock at night. for 2 days from now. We get those dispatched the next day at 3 o'clock, and then the workflow is determined for all the staff for the next day. So it's incredibly valuable in terms of dispatching and access to your own records as an applicant and access to status information and providing you with the details of what's missing from your application and being able to message an inspector when they're not available to you because they're inspecting a building. So being able to message the actual person who's reviewing your plans and have a question go in when you're ready to ask the question and for them to be able to provide an answer when they're available. So there's so many benefits. And I appreciate that would be very difficult and time consuming to measure.
Not to mention potentially the customer service value that's gained in all of this by having that more detailed, rich data available to people who are applicants in progress, right?
I feel far more confident in answering a question about a delay or about a concern when I can log in myself and find the data without having to track down the inspector.
Fair enough. Thank you. Let me just let's just check to make sure that anybody else who wants to have a shot here. Anybody have any further questions, supplementary comments? Councillor Johnston.
Just to comment to your comment about someone has to pay at some point, and we've all sat through, everybody here sat through 2 budgets. Unfortunately, I've been here for at least 20. And every year as we're looking at building our reserve funds to do capital projects, you know, and I'm not picking on Linden, but roads are the big one and bridges and stuff, and we're pushing them out, and we were always falling behind. And this is the same thing. At some point, we just gotta say enough's enough. We gotta move to the proper fee. And I'm not saying option A is the proper fee right now, but at some point we have to get to that number where we're not taking it off the general, because it's not fair for farmers in nearly Palmerston or Moncton that are paying a portion of their fees for houses being developed in Atwood and Listowel. That's not fair. That's not fair to all our people. But it's not fair to our builders to go from, I don't know, the 1,700 to 4,066 as of June 1st. You know what I mean? That's a big pill to swallow. So I think that's not fair either. But at some point we have to get there. It's just how do we, as the Council of North Perth, figure out our best way to maneuver through that. So just my ramblings. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Anyone else before we give Councillor Rothwell another shot? Kate, you ready?
Thanks very much, Mayor Todd, and I should have asked this question earlier, but back to the e-permitting process. Obviously, there was a decision made by council, staff and council in terms of going in that fashion, and I believe that cost was certainly offset by the building department, but can anyone tell us how much that software cost for implementation to be able to do the administrative things that actually have sped some things up?
So I suspect there are 2 costs, right? There's the cost when we initially onboarded that software into our processes, and then there's an annual recurring cost, I'm guessing.
It's an annual subscription.
Yeah.
And off the top of my head, it's in the neighborhood of $24,000 to $27,000 annually. It's in that neighborhood.
Thank you.
So through you, Mayor, there's a cost for efficiency, and we just heard, and that's an ongoing cost that we never had before, which is offset on the building department side. So, I think if we dig down into some of these things, there's reasons why we're in the situation we're at, and it's not just any one particular issue. It's a whole series of issues that we need to realize and get to, and we're not going to correct it overnight, in my view. We need to rectify it. It's just a matter of how best and understand how we got there and make sure that we don't get there again. That's my view. Thanks.
Thanks. I still think that probably the majority of this impact that we're seeing is coming from the transition in staffing and supports necessary to continue to carry out our statutory functions. And so when you look at efficiency costs, I think there's little doubt in my mind, at least, that from time to time you have to spend upfront or on an ongoing basis to get the gain. The interesting question, and I hope I'm tracking where you want to go with this, is did we get $27,000 worth of gain in terms of the total customer service improvements, the reduction in calls, the reduction in handling of emails, the reduction in going to the filing cabinet and pulling stuff out? Did we get the value out of that in terms of staff time released back to us or other resources reduced, right? I don't know whether the staff wishes to opine on this at this point, but you're welcome to.
I would just add that the other measure in there as to the value of the software is in your liability and accountability when questioned or when sued.
Okay. Better reporting, I assume, is what you are talking about. Thank you. All right. Any other questions? Anyone from the gallery wishing to ask a question that someone up here missed? Okay. I think then that we've come to the end of this public meeting. It was a statutory meeting under the Building Code Act. We have done what was needed, I believe, and still have an opportunity when we resume into regular council to continue our thinking and planning in terms of direction to staff on this matter. So on that basis then, let's adjourn this public meeting and we'll resume in regular council for giving further direction. All right, let me tap again. I now declare that the recess period during which a public meeting was held is now over, and note that we have reconvened into our regular meeting of council. As item 7 on our agenda, I think we should consider what direction we want to give to staff pertaining to this matter at this time. So I would entertain suggestions. I know we heard some in the public meeting. Where are we going with this, colleagues? Where's your will? I heard a series of sort of practical comments about wanting more from staff, more from the consultants. So let's itemize those things for the clerk so that she can capture this in a resolution. Councillor Johnston?
So going back to the deputy mayor's comments about a longer phase-in period, can we get likely Ashton to run his magic numbers to figure out how much more it would cost us if we were to phase, plan option B was 3 years. Could you do it over 5 and maybe 7, just so we can compare those numbers as to how much of a deficit that's going to create for us? Because I think we have those numbers for 3, how much 3 is going to cost us in phasing it in. But I think I'd like to see the 5 and 7s, if that's, and I know we're committing, and I like that we're committing to reviewing them in 2029. So we'd be reviewing them before we even get to the end number. But I think to cushion it, we need to look at those numbers, at least in my opinion.
Okay, so that's one potential action. I'm trusting the clerk table to jot these down for the sake of a possible resolution. Councillor Blazek.
And I believe it was Councillor Johnson that suggested that we look into like a tiered system for like single family homes where it's dependent on lot size or square footage, depending on what direction we wanted to go. But I think that we need to explore that option as well.
Okay. I certainly remembered comments about forms that lead to affordability. So probably I'll narrow band this, but we could expand it if we want to think about it this way. For those who are willing to enter into agreements with CMHC for long-term affordable housing, I think there's a possible exemption or relief there. Councillor Andreessen, it looked like you had your hand up.
Yes, I was wanting to make sure that that was a consideration in the next report, is consideration around those projects that we're engaging with CMHC to make sure that perhaps we could provide some relief in terms of these charges.
Okay, who else has got one? I'm seeing a finger being pointed, but I'm not sure who's being pointed at. Councillor Nordum.
Yeah, thanks. Also, maybe some comparison for financials between Minto and Mapleton, if that would be possible.
And they may be using a different model for assessing their fees, right? It seems to me there's two models here, the comparative model and then the actual cost model. And most of them, including us, I think, worked on the comparative model over the years. But did you want to comment on this?
I can just explain that a little bit. When I was able to prepare this based on the other municipalities, we don't know what their recoverable costs are. We don't know what a lot of their information is and where they get those numbers from. So what I did was, based on a 2,500 square foot house, if they were based on square footage, we were able to find their price. If they are based on cost of construction, saying it's $200 a square foot, I rounded out to get an average amount so that we could get an even number. So if I was to take those two models, you would still get this, you would get an idea, but it won't be exactly because we don't know what their circumstances are.
Yeah, I'm still fine with getting just a general. Usually Minto and Mapleton are just a touch higher than us, so usually I'm curious. So thanks.
Councillor Andries.
Yes, thank you. Through you, two things. Just a second look at the cost of tents and perhaps looking at how that could be lowered as well based on the usage for special events. And secondly, what the modeling would look like in terms of the levy for our constituents through our treasurer. I don't know what the timeframes are, but I think if we do decide to perhaps subsidize this through taxation, then we need to know what the impact would be on our constituents. So I don't know what the time frame would be on that, but I would leave that up to the treasurer. Thank you.
I think given that we talked about 5 and 7 year modeling, I think that it would be appropriate then to model this out. I sense that there's not a lot of enthusiasm for putting us on the tax levy, the general tax levy, but I think we should see what that would look like, what we think percentage-wise that would look like in terms of a tax increase for the sake of having the data and being able to understand it, right? Okay. Anyone else? Councillor Rothwell.
Thank you, Mayor Todd. We did, further to your comment about options to deal with encouraging affordability and perhaps through reductions in building permit fees or keeping them similar or the same. And there was some discussion in the report about additional dwelling units, as well as I know we do have an exemption or a reduction for fee for a small dwelling unit size on our development charges bylaw. So if that could be highlighted as a part of that comprehensive approach to what this municipality is prepared to do to encourage smaller dwelling unit sizes and intensification initiatives. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think it's complex, right? As soon as we get into that, we are also getting into, cross-department contributions and so forth. CAO Snell might want to speak to this, but certainly, as you say, in 2018, I believe, we dropped the development charges on small footprint properties and housing development. And CAO Snell, did you want to comment?
I'd just like to and I think they are separate processes, and I'd like to remind Council that Council has commissioned an affordable housing CIP, which will include financial incentive programs. One of those programs will be a planning and building permit fee reduction for units that meet the attainable and affordable housing definitions as defined by our community improvement plan. That will be actually posted tomorrow. We'll be proceeding to a public meeting in the near future, and we'll be before Council for adoption, hopefully in the near future. But it is a separate process, but there are going to be lots of programs for affordable and attainable housing. Now, again, all those programs will have to be funded by the tax base outside of the permit fee program.
Thank you. And that's sort of the oddness in some ways is that, we're doing this tonight, but the CIP is just about to be delivered as well. And so we're in this zone where there are things happening that weigh on the broad picture of affordability of housing. Okay. Did we miss any direction for the resolution that we're going to consider? So we need the first part of the resolution to indicate that council acknowledges that we've held this public meeting. Whether you want me to do that separately, I have a resolution separately, so I can do that, and then we can give the direction resolution. Is that the clerk's preference? All right, let's do that then. Let's consider then the resolution as follows, that the Council of the Municipality of North Perth acknowledges that a public meeting to consider proposed changes to building permit fees was held pursuant to Section 7 of the Building Code Act. Can I call for a mover on this one? Councillor Johnston and Councillor Richardson will be our seconder. Any discussion or debate? We were all there. Councillor Rothwell?
Thanks very much, Mayor Kasenberg. I just want to confirm that the written responses will form part of the public record. They don't have to be read in, as I understand, but they will be incorporated as part of the public record. I believe there were 2. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm seeing the clerk nodding her head yes. If she'd like to be definitive, go ahead.
Yes, 2 pieces of written correspondence were included in the agenda. The ones that were submitted today will be included as Schedule A to the minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So then next up is a resolution that we've essentially composed amongst ourselves. How are you feeling about this one, Clerk Carter? Where are we? Do you want to read a draft resolution into the record or put it up on the screen or something? Oh, I'm ahead of myself. That happens every once in a while. It's difficult to be a trendsetter and a forward thinker, right? All right, it's a good idea to have a vote, apparently. So let's have that vote. Is that what it is? Councillor Johnson tells me I have cyclone hangover. That's an exciting thing to have, indeed. All right, that is carried. Thank you. All right, now let's move to the resolution, which has more detail from amongst our efforts, and we'll consider whether we want all these pieces in the direction. So, if I can call on Clerk Carter to read into the record what we have. If you have it typed out and can put it up for us, that wouldn't be a terrible thing. Okay. Oh, bigger, please, if you can. There we go. All right. You know what? I can read this, so I might as well. That staff be directed to prepare a report back to council, including modeling a 5 and 7 year phase-in plan, further investigating a tiered fee system based on square footage, further investigating cross-subsidy for developers committed to entering into CMHC agreements for affordability, we should probably say. General financial comparison data from Mapleton and Minto, investigation of cross subsidy for tent fees, model impact on taxpayers if funded through, and this should be in whole or in part by the tax system. So you may want to play with that, in my opinion, and investigate potential reductions to encourage smaller building unit sizes and intensification. All right. That's what we cooked up together, colleagues. Anyone want to quibble with any of those things before I call for a mover and a seconder on this? Okay, I'm not seeing any quibbling, so let's have a mover for this. Who would like to move this? Deputy Mayor Callum, thank you, and seconded by Councillor Richardson. Any discussion or debate on this further? Last chance tonight on this one. All right, let's have a vote. That's a good idea. Okay, and that is carried unanimously. Thank you, colleagues, for collaborating on this one. Here we go. Let's turn back to our agenda. There's a little bit more to do. We received a letter from the Listowel District Secondary School, put on our agenda because it is a rather timely item. And as item 8.1, Council therefore has received a request from LDSS seeking permission to close a road adjacent to the school on May 31st, 2024, for the purposes of establishing on the road a Pride Festival for students. Questions, comments, Councillor Blazek?
Sorry, I don't have a question. I was just going to put my hand up
Oh.
to move a motion.
Oh, she's going to move. All right. So moved. Seconded by Councillor Andreessen. Thank you. I actually have the details of the resolution, but it was to the effect of closing this road from 9 a.m. until 2 p.m. on Friday, May 31st for the LDSS Pride Month Carnival, Maitland Avenue South from Main Street East to Clayton Street, and the North Perth Fire, Public Works, OPP, and Perth County EMS be advised of the event. So moved by Councillor Blazek. Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Andreessen. Any discussion or debate? Seeing none, let's have that vote. And that is carried. We can advise the school that they can go ahead. And now let's consider our confirmatory bylaw. This is obviously put in place for the purpose of confirming all of our actions business over the course of our meeting. This one is number 40-2024 as follows. The bylaw 40-2024 being a bylaw to confirm generally previous actions of the Council of the Municipality of North Perth is hereby passed. Moved by Councillor Rothwell. Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Duncan. Any discussion or debate? Seeing none, let's have that vote. And that is carried. Thank you. And of course, colleagues, that brings us to the happy time. But before we go to happy time, I do want to pick up on Councillor Johnston's comments. The Cyclones brought it home. And we're excited about that and congratulatory of them. I trust that we can make appropriate contact with them and invite them to a council meeting for recognition because they did us proud over several weeks of playoffs, and we're glad for their enthusiasm, their skill, and what they have meant to our community this year in taking their run this deep to the ultimate that they can achieve. So, hooray. Thank you. We have completed the deliberation and taken action on the things that we were asked to do tonight, and so it's appropriate that we consider adjournment as follows: that the council meeting adjourned, at 8:33 p.m. to meet again for council business, general council business on Monday, May 27th, 2024 at 7 p.m. Moved by Councillor Nordham, thank you. Seconded by Councillor Duncan, thank you. It's not debatable. Let's have that vote. And that is carried. We are adjourned from this meeting, and council meets again on Monday, May 27th, 2024.